Hi, good morning, everyone, and thanks for attending today's webinar. If you've attended the first webinar in this series, welcome back. If you haven't, this is a great segue to understand particularly the ramifications of dispatchable location and how 911 Inform can address that. If you were unable to attend the first one, Jake, if you don't mind advancing, I think we'll see you here in a second. You'll see the last event we did here on the 24th, and that video is available at neweratech.com/video. So go ahead and go check that out if you haven't been able to yet. And you'll also see that we had a following event coming up. So today we'll have our introductions, and we'll talk about, as mentioned, dispatchable location. Having been on a number of meetings with Fletch and Jake and the team, this seems to be really a really hot part of that conversation, one that really needs to be addressed. So we'll talk about that in detail. We'll talk about what we're seeing in the field. Those conversations, as I just mentioned, tend to be very unique for every customer. So we'll share some of that. And Q&A. If you have a question throughout the presentation, please type it in the question or chat field. If we don't get to it today, this is being recorded, and we'll have record of that question so we can reply back to you. So my name is Joe Paquette. I'm the Director of Business Development in the Northeast. Part of my responsibility is to bring these educational events to our clients, and that's certainly what we're doing today. And in a moment, we'll introduce ourselves to Mark and Jake. Jake, if you don't mind, thank you. Yep. So if you weren't at the previous event and you are new to New Era, very quickly, you can see 40 offices around the globe, 1,600 plus employees. And what that really, the important part for me is really that's about from education and design through implementation and post support. So it's that entire life cycle of trying to help you understand what the technology fit might be all the way through that post support phase. And on the next slide, Jake, you'll see some of those solution areas broken out graphically. Today, we're really talking about collaboration, UC, and security aspects, but this conversation would definitely tie in data networking and potentially our managed services and Cloud Blue services. So if you're working with a rep today, if you have questions in any of these, please do not hesitate to reach out to us. My next couple slides are usually the favorite for me. So we capture the information from the registration questions that you guys were asked, present those back to you to see how you're doing compared to your peers, I guess. So the first question was, does your organization allow remote workers with telephony? 60% yes. Second question, does your organization deploy smartphones for these remote workers? Fairly big number, if I recall, coming in, so almost 40%. I think that's a potential. Fletch has probably already got his ears perked up. That's a potential one we need to really look out for. Third question, do these remote workers have different extension numbers for these devices? And thankfully, the answer was no, if I believe 100%. So that's a great answer there. Is your organization alerted when a remote user dials 911? That's a small number. Yeah, that's a small number. So only 10% of you know if that remote user has dialed 911. Have you looked at other E911 solutions in the past? Not surprisingly, it looks like everyone has. And have you looked at next generation 911 solutions in the past? And maybe surprisingly, 100% said no, they have not. So today's webinar and certainly next webinar in this three-part series will address the NG911 component. But I think we'll see that these answers are pretty true to the meetings we're having with clients and really foster some of these great conversations. So with that, I think I'll turn over to Fletch and Jake if you guys just want to give a brief introduction, and I'll get out of the way. Thank you, guys.
Thanks very much, Joe. Really appreciate it. And thanks to all the folks over at New Era Technology. I was just commenting before the call started. A few channel partners really take this seriously, and New Era has definitely stepped up in this particular thing and making sure their customers understand their potential liability and exposure. So as Joe said, I'm Mark Fletcher. I'm the Vice President of Public Safety Solutions here at 911 Inform. And joining me today is Jake Damphouse. Jake?
Thank you, Fletcher. Thank you, Joe. Yep, Jake Damphouse, Channel Manager with 911 Inform, and have been working with Joe and the New Era team, just trying to bring this solution to market for the past few months. So I'll kick it back to Fletch just for a quick legislative overview.
Yeah, so it's really about dispatchable location, right? That's where we're at today. Gary's Law was turned on in February 2018, and Ray Bombs was added to that in January of 2021, which added in the dispatchable location, which is on site and to public safety. Now, dispatchable location, that's a new term. It does not necessarily mean the cubicle or desk location of the caller. That freaked out a lot of people. The law actually says dispatchable location is the street address of the caller plus additional information needed to locate that caller in a reasonable amount of time. Now, those are very wide terms. Locate the user in a reasonable amount of time. And it's because every building is like a snowflake. You can have a very complex building where you need detailed floor plans, or you can have a very wide open space that happens to be very large. So the law was written and defined in a way where it just makes sense, or it allows you to do.
Looks like we lost Fletch. He's been having some technical issues. So,
and that applies it to January 2021 to what makes sense. A wired device SIP into the wall.
And Jake, I can chat Fletch if you want.
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
Yep.
Then you have to be compliant. January 2020.
Keeps going in and out. Apologies to all that are that have joined. So really, as Fletch had been talking about, and just to kind of sum up, dispatchable location is that additional information to locate a calling party in a reasonable amount of time. And up top here, these timelines can basically outline when those laws are applicable and what new and upgraded systems are applicable in those timelines as well. We'll be sure to anyone who's on the call that wants this specifically laid out, we can certainly send that out after the call. So when we're talking about dispatchable location, we talk about that information that needs to be sent to public safety. That location that needs to be sent to public safety when it comes to information. The art of location discovery really comes up, and the reason we say that that's an art is because there's no real one answer as far as determining device location. We're going to go over layer 2 to the switch port, layer 3 to subnets, and then the application layer that we've added, which is 911 Inform LDS. Really, we can ingest all this information to determine the device location and make sure that that's a valid address and additional information that's being sent not only to public safety and the 911 call taker, but to on-site officials so that an emergency response can begin. So if we look at layer 2, as it's called, and we're looking really at determining the switch port. Now, as we look at a building and we've mapped these switch ports out to individual rooms, the issue that kind of comes up is all these cable records have to be basically spot on. If one of these is disrupted or moved, that these records of where these cables are going may not make sense. What we can determine from this is at least where the building is, right? We know where that device is registered. We can ingest that information. And in the perfect scenario, understanding where that port is will give us pretty granular information. But again, the certainty level of that information is pretty low just because the maintenance that's required when it comes to cable records. So more often than not, what would happen is you break down a building into zones and assign a subnet to those zones. So if we look at this building here, what we're really doing is trading off the granularity and the certainty of the information and location for a little bit more certainty as far as, okay, we know that call is coming from this zone. It's a definite trade-off as far as determining the device location, but in some respects, reporting a zone as itself would be determined as a dispatchable location. Sometimes, those buildings are not set up in a way. It would require an overhaul of a network in order to make this work. So what we've done is basically added something over the top, and that's layer 7, and this is 911 Inform LDS. So when we can use the information from layer 2 and layer 3, that's great. But if sometimes we need more information and further clarification as far as where that device is located, we use this process. So basically, if we kind of walk through an example, Bob comes in, he registers his phone. We know the building based on layer 2, layer 3 data, whether it be we're grabbing that from the switch port, or we just kind of have a general range of IP addresses, but we don't know exactly where that device is located. So what we do, and we'll get into how we kind of go about doing this in a bit, but we send that link to Bob. We send an SMS or an email to Bob's smart devices. Now that can be a cell phone, that can be a laptop, but basically what we do is borrow his location services. So once he's clicked on that link, we use those location services, same technology that you use when you get an Uber or use Google Maps to get directions. The location services within that device knows where that device is, and he's next to his PBX device. Once he confirms the location of his PBX device, that record is stored internally. And now if that device were to make a 911 phone call, the updated location is what would be reported. Now again, this is on top of layer 2 and layer 3 when more clarification is needed. So if we kind of look at them as a whole, and we are trying to determine the granularity and the certainty level of using all of these methods, if we combine them all, we can come away with a net-net scenario where the granularity level is high as well as the certainty level. That's really the optimum outcome here, because when we're just using that dispatchable location to get that information into the call taker's hands with a high level of granularity and a high level of certainty, allows that 911 response to become efficient and then also, confident. The organizations themselves can also establish policies and procedures where if we've reached out to Bob and that location hasn't been updated, we can either send Bob another email or a text message that can basically remind him, hey, this device is now out of compliance. We need that location updated. And if Bob then ignores that secondary reminder, we can escalate those alerts to whether it be an IT help desk, their superior, whoever it may be, just to ensure that alert is not ignored and that device is in compliance. The other beauty of updating these records internally, and we'll get into that process in just a moment, but we can basically update as we go, as information comes in. The legacy way of 911 location reporting really didn't allow for that. You know, each time a record was updated, there was a 24, 48-hour gap where whatever was inputted by the either the management of that record, you know, that was a static record. By doing it internally, we can update as we go and take whatever data we've gotten to at least provide some level of detail. As more detail comes in, we can update and move forward. So as we look at, so as we look at kind of those internal records, obviously we need to know how to contact Bob. That can be preferred on his end, and he can set that up, whether it be to a cell phone or an email address if he doesn't want to provide his personal information. We can often use organization provided smartphones as well. But we need to associate that device with an end user. Now, for some scenarios, whether they be common area phones or exam room phones, things like that, that aren't necessarily tied to an end user, we can tie those to a group of users, whether it be IT, someone who has control over those devices. And you know, typically when we talk about those common area phones, IT is going to know when those are moved anyways. And if they are moved without permission of whoever oversees that device, it'll essentially act as a notification that this device is moved without you know, clearance too. All this information is stored in the AWS GovCloud. It's a FedRAMP certified high resiliency cloud instance. And again, that's stored internally so that we can update as we go. On the back end, the information that is stored when a 911 call is made is dynamically attached to the 911 call. So rather than having to have that data stored in a public database where the 911 center really just looks up that information based on phone number, with the way that we kind of do things, that information is sent with the call at the time of the call rather than having to be there before a call is made. It allows a lot more flexibility and validity when it comes to that dispatchable location. So when it comes to the location discovery and that process that we kind of went over with Bob, there are ways that we can do this in any environment, really, whether they be known environments that are within your organization, public environments such as, you know, a Starbucks, or you know, public environments that are external to your organization, or for those work at home users. And really, the process is kind of as follows. When a device is registered, we get a notification off of the PBX that there has been a registration event. Once we see that registered user is contacted via their preferred method, whether that be a text message or an email, and the user is prompted to update that location. So if they're internal to your facilities, one of our features is that we draw those floor plans, and those are kind of useful in two ways. We use those to allow the end user to update their location and provide an easy landmark as far as where they are, as well as for notifications and reporting, which we'll hit in a moment. If those users are external, whether they be in a public or work at home environment, we obviously don't have floor plans of those environments. So what we'll do is send basically a Google Maps view, and they can provide that information as you see on the right there. Either way, those on the back end, everything is converted down to a basic street address with the additional information to be sent as a dispatchable location. The other important thing to note here is we don't, you know, a user is a user to us, whether they be internal or external. The process remains the same, and really the only differentiator is whether we send them a floor plan if they're in your building or a Google Maps if they're external. It allows us to be flexible, allows those devices to be flexible with mobility, and it still provides that dispatchable location when a 911 call would be made. The other important thing, and as Joe had mentioned earlier, I think it was 37% of your organizations provide hard phones that are in the work from home environment. And really those are high risk because those are just sitting out. When you think of a smartphone on a laptop, those aren't as easily accessible. But a hard phone, it can be sitting on your desk at home. You have children that walk in, something may have happened. They just look at a phone, they say, oh, 911. It's really important for those devices to be not only calling the correct 911 center, but also reporting the accurate home address where that device is located. So now we've talked about the location discovery and the capabilities of how we can really ingest all of that information. But now, once we have that information and a 911 call is made, if we really look at what the 911 center is seeing when it comes to E911 versus NG911. So in an E911 environment, and we actually have an actual view into a 911 call taker, and the screens that they're really looking at. So this is a bit zoomed in because we didn't want to show any faces, but really they have a lot of information. Some of it is based on the caller, some of it is based on who they have at their disposal to dispatch when an emergency is provided. So if we look at this screen, in the E911 environment, really the information that they're getting in regards to the 911 call that they're taking is this black and green screen. And if we take a zoomed in view of that, this is really the E911 information. And it's really boiled down to two lines here. There is address line 1, which is the basic street address that most people provide, some, not all, and address line 2. Address line 2 is highlighted here in that red box, and that is really where that dispatchable location sits in the E911 environment. It's basically broken down to 20 to 30 characters of text-based information, and it's really, as Fletch had talked about earlier, that dispatchable location is additional information that allows responders to find that emergency in a reasonable amount of time. That 20 to 30 characters is the space in which the floor, room, wing, any additional information that you may determine to be useful to a 911 call taker and the first responders, that's really where that's limited to. So when it comes to the information and all this process that we've done to determine the device, really does get boiled down to these 20 characters in the E911 environment. Now, if we look at the same screen, excuse me, in the NG911 environment, the middle screen there is the NG911 facing infrastructure. And what NG911 provides is the capability for multimedia, two-way communication, additional assets within a building to be basically brought up with a 911 call. So in the same environment, we will still send that E911 data because it's a universally used thing today. But as of today, over 93% of the population is covered by a PSAP or a 911 center that is using NG911 infrastructure. So this capability is widely in place today. And really, again, that is the multimedia information that can be sent across. So we can provide floor plans, we can provide emergency assets within a building. We can also hand over connected building controls, and we're really going to take a deep dive into that in our third session, as far as the capabilities that any enterprise can really do when it comes to handing over technology in the event of an emergency. The multimedia information that's provided is obviously the floor plan, but when a 911 call is made, we can highlight the room. If there's additional information that the 911 call taker is hearing while on that call that is relevant to share, that can also be shared to not only the external first responders, but your internal security teams and responders as well. So in the event of that emergency, relevant information is being updated in real time. I think that's the real important part about this is, this is a live screen. It's not just a static line of data, it's moving. So if something were to happen, and if you think of a scenario where a 911 call was, in this case, placed from the cafeteria, but it really actually happened in the kitchen or the break room, they have the ability to go change the location of that emergency so that everyone that's responding is on the same page. It could also provide best access routes. So obviously in a lot of healthcare environments, as you can see here, there's 24 doors, excuse me. Understanding which entrance is the easiest way to get to that emergency is highly important. As we showed, door 2 is the green unlocked door. That is the easiest way to get to that emergency in the most efficient way. So as these things evolve throughout the emergency response, all of that can be happening fluidly, not only in the call taker screen, but internally. And these notifications are sent to your internal teams. And that's another thing that we'll break out in session 3 as far as what capabilities we have to notify you internally as an emergency goes on. So really, as we kind of wrapped up and wind down, that bidirectional communication, as we just kind of talked about with the NG911, it really does bridge that emergency gap. So there's that communication going back and forth between your organization and those first responders as an emergency develops. The information that's gathered as that emergency is developing, whether it be medical, active shooter, bomb threat, lockdown, fire, any of that information that may be relevant to anyone else who's responding, who may not even be at the scene yet, can be passed along. And it basically provides a single pane of glass so that everyone that's involved has that information and can provide it to those who may need it. And as that information is passed along, it's that situational awareness that may end up shaving some time off of that emergency response and create that efficiency as it moves along. So, we talked about this in our first session, and I don't know, Joe, if you want to kind of describe, some of the follow-ups that we've done based on that first session. But
yeah.
Fletch, go ahead, Joe.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Jake. So on the post-survey form that'll come out, you can select to have this discovery meeting. And it really takes into account a lot of the topics that Jake was discussing. But what I've found so far is with all of our clients, there seems to be a different level of perhaps urgency within different departments, understanding within different departments. So this meeting is a great way to have sort of a level set for the organization to understand, here's where we are today. Here are our perceived concerns with where we sit today relative to 911. And it helps you sort of develop that game plan moving forward. So coming out of this meeting, again, we'll chat about where you are today. And if desired, we'll present you with a bill of materials associated with getting you from current state to the acceptable state. Jake, I have found these meetings to be just incredibly eye-opening with the clients, particularly again as it relates to different departments within the organizations. Anything you can share to that?
Yeah, I think it's been very useful in terms of really understanding the client's needs and where they're kind of at when it comes to, what can we provide on top of anything that they may already be doing. Internal departments that are kind of now getting on the same page as this, unravels. Obviously, when it comes to 911, there's quite a few stakeholders that are involved. You have often IT and technical resources, but you also have security teams that are the ones that are being notified of these emergencies and are often the ones that are responding, whether it be on campus or with the external users. I think, Joe, one of the data points was only, I think, 10% are notified when a 911 call is made from an external user. Now, when you look at that, they're often maybe not something that internal security may be able to do, whether they're traveling and out of state or something like that, but still being aware of the emergency that's happening, using that network. And we've had these conversations that have kind of gone through, and it's been really good to have everyone on the same page when we leave the meeting as far as where that customer's at and what next steps really need to be taken.
Awesome. So if you've attended one of these events and have already had this meeting, I probably won't send you the questionnaire, but if this is your first webinar and you want to have that discovery meeting, I'll send you a questionnaire in advance. It'll help us sort of get ready for this meeting. And as Jake mentioned, it sort of gives you the opportunity for these different departments to collectively answer this questionnaire and can see where you're at. So yeah, easy to do, just fill out on that survey. Jake,
One thing I'd like to add on that, if I could.
Oh, hey, Fletch.
Yeah, no, I've been here. I just apologize for the horrific internet service I've got the past couple of days. That meeting, I think, is probably one of the most critical steps that you can take. And I would encourage everyone that's going to have that meeting to involve as many people as possible. You cannot invite too many people to this meeting. And not only should your IT people be there, but your IT administrative, your IT operations folks, your security department is critical. They're the ones interfacing with public safety in an event. If you're a large facility, and I've done this with many large facilities, the local 911 center will actually send a representative to kind of act as a referee and validation source. Yes, we want this data. No, it's great that you've got that data, but that's not what we really need. So if you're large enough, don't be afraid to invite them in. They're there to help you solve your problem. You want to talk to your HR people, your legal folks, your maintenance and facilities people, because you've got access control. And emergency services is one of the biggest umbrellas that you're ever going to work with. And like I said, you cannot invite too many people to this meeting. And the ones that I've attended where they have, it's been probably the most productive installations and implementations.
Yeah, I'd agree, Fletch, 100%. So folks, next session, the third part of the series coming up on July 22nd, as you can see. You may have received already the invitation for that. If not, I'm sure they'll be going out here soon. So if you have questions in advance of Next Generation 911, you can always reach out. Otherwise, we'll be covering those topics on this webinar. With that, Fletch and Jake, as always, man, I really want to thank you guys for partnering with us and getting this message out to clients. Your support has been great. And for all those that have attended today, thanks for spending this time with us. Jake and Fletch, anything you want to add before we end?
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to the dive into the next generation 911 topics that we will discuss in the next session. We've kind of gone through the legislative parts and how we can solve for that, but some of the additional things that you may be able to roadmap down the line here with connected building technologies and creating additional situational awareness for your organization within those emergency events. And it will kind of show, I guess, for lack of a better term, the cool stuff in the third one with a live demo of the solution. But again, thank you, Joe, and the New Era team for putting these on. The response has been great, and thanks to everyone who has joined the call today. We do appreciate your time, it's great to see you all.
Yeah, I'd like to add to that. I mean, thanks to everybody at New Era who's done a great job and everybody for showing up today. But think about this if you're a PBX administrator. This task that's ahead of you with a 911 compliance may likely be the most important thing you do in your career. And I'll say, think back to December 1st of 2013, when Carrie Hunt was being stabbed 29 times by her husband, and her 9-year-old daughter knew to dial 911, but wasn't able to. Somewhere there's an administrator or a technician or whomever said, oh, making 911 direct access, that's a dial plan problem. I don't understand it. I'm not going to bother with it. Yeah, you could have somebody's lives in your hands over a simple decision. So thank you for showing up and looking at this. And I'll leave you with, don't take this decision lightly. This is critical life safety stuff. And thanks everybody for showing up today.
Thanks, Fletch. Thanks all. Have a great day. We'll talk to you soon.